The following is a hockey podcast out of Vancouver and Surrey, British Columbia. It'll only consist of a lot of puck talk and even more BS, or in actual words, banter and satire. Enjoy, and as always, go Canucks go.
He was supposed to be the glue guy in that locker room, but it's very clear there ain't no glue in Vancouver. Unless someone's sniffing glue. What's going on with this team?
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome to another episode of Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs, co-host of Locked On Canucks and also a Canucks writer currently with Daily Hive Vancouver. Before we get into it, we got to thank you for tuning into Locked On Canucks because we're nothing without you listening, and we're also not here without those sponsors, baby. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Man, oh man, ticket prices may be dropping by 1% or 2% with the Canucks' recent form. And if you're going to go get some tickets, make sure you do so on Gametime. Go download that Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. The Vancouver Canucks, they are the perfect bipolar hockey team, right? They go into Carolina, they suck. Against the Toronto Maple Leafs, they get a big win, and then they put up arguably their worst performance against this season against the Winnipeg Jets. Maybe not their worst performance because there have been a number of clunkers this season. And if things keep trending in this direction, you have to start to wonder, with the Canucks' biggest unrestricted free agent, does it make sense to re-sign him? Or should the Canucks explore a trade prior to the trade deadline? That's what I want to kick off today's episode of Locked On Canucks with a little Brock Boeser contract talk. What is he worth to the Vancouver Canucks? What would another team pay him? Let's also talk about some Brock Boeser destinations. If they are going to trade him, what destinations, what teams might be interested in his services? We'll talk a bit about the Tanner Jeannot revenge game tonight for your Vancouver Canucks and touch on the Cam Neely former Canuck of the week as well. But Brock Boeser, okay, the longest tenured Canuck right now in terms of the guy who's been on the roster, of course. Thatcher Demko drafted 1 year before Brock Boeser in 2014 by the Vancouver Canucks. Guillaume Brisebois drafted 2 rounds after Brock Boeser in that 2015 draft. He, of course, remains with the hockey team right now. But Brock Boeser, he is the longest tenured Canuck on the roster right now, having spent his whole career in Vancouver. And although he's only hit that elusive 30-goal plateau once, he has averaged 30 goals and 66 points per season throughout his NHL career so far in 515 games. He's 6 goals away from 200 in his career. Like, Brock Boeser has been a solid player for the Vancouver Canucks. And this season, you know, he does have 15 goals in 36 games. He's right on pace for a goal total in the low 30s once again. So not quite the dreamlike performance he had last season for the Vancouver Canucks, but still a pretty damn good season overall. But this is where you start to wonder if paying Brock Boeser makes sense. Now, I mean, I love Brock Boeser. He is definitely, he's one of the sexiest players in the NHL, man. How can you not love this guy? But he will be 28 years old next month, and he's going to command a hefty raise. A raise that it would be surprising if it wasn't north of $8 million. Now, The Athletic recently released their player cards, and they give an approximate value on the player based on their performance over the last 3 seasons, but of course more heavily weighted towards this season. And this gave me some pause here because Brock Boeser, according to the card on The Athletic, if you're on YouTube, you can see it live with us here. Brock Boeser's market value is $6.6 million, pretty much exactly in line with what the team is paying him right now. Do you really want to be giving this guy a raise to $8 million plus per season? It's a fair question because, again, the Canucks, we talked about it before, their cap situation is going to be more dire next season. The OEL is going to hit the Canucks with his contract costing the Canucks $4.7 million on the books. And Brock Boeser, I mean, here's the thing about re-signing Brock Boeser. If you believe that this team is still in a Stanley Cup contention window, and I haven't completely given up hope yet, but I've almost given up hope because it certainly seems like something needs to change with that mix, with that team. Kyle and I talked about in the last post-game show, this core has been through 3 head coaches, with Rick Tocchet being the 3rd guy. You can blame the coach all you want, and I think the coach deserves some blame, but the primary culprit here seems to be the core. And Brock Boeser, from a lot of reports out there, a lot of whispers, the birds are whispering. Brock Boeser is somewhat of a glue guy in that room, and you can kind of see it personality-wise. He's a very even-keeled dude. Maybe the guy perhaps that keeps JT Miller in check, but obviously that notion has kind of died down over the past few months as reports of locker room tension have grown in Vancouver. So Brock Boeser, is he worth more than $8 million per season? I would argue no. I'm going to argue no. Brock Boeser probably deserves to make somewhere in that $6 to $7 million range. Now, the cap is going to go up, right? All reports suggest that the cap will go up to at least $92.5 million next year, if not, maybe even $94, $95 million. So that does give the Canucks some wiggle room. And Brock Boeser, he's a likable guy. He's a marketable guy. Again, he has scored at a 30-goal pace throughout his NHL career. So if Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford can work their magic and get him in that $7-ish million range, it might make some sense for the Canucks. Now, a lot of balls in the air with this hockey team, right? Does it make sense to re-sign Brock Boeser if you're going to trade a guy like JT Miller, who has basically a best ride shotgun with him for most of the past 2 seasons, certainly throughout most of Rick Tocchet's tenure? If you trade a guy like Elias Pettersson, does it make sense to keep Brock Boeser? You could argue both ways. Does it make more sense for them to keep Brock Boeser in the fold? Because you need top 6 guys to win, top 6 scorers to win. But again, if you trade one of those top 2 centers, what does that return look like? There's so many variables with this hockey team right now. But again, my argument is that paying Boeser north of $8 million a season, you might be better off to trade him, get some assets, and build this team out. Because again, the Canucks, their management team has done a good job of building the depth in the forward group. But this team desperately needs more help. They're not going to go anywhere as long as their stars are underperforming. And Brock Boeser, one other thing I'll say about him as well is that, based on what he's done through his NHL career, he's been incredibly consistent. Maybe, just maybe, Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford convince him to take a bit of a discount. And now that seems kind of crazy right now based on what's gone on. And again, Boeser's been through a tumultuous time in Vancouver. He's been through requesting a trade, being berated by the media about trade requests too. Then all of a sudden deciding that, actually, I do want to stay in Vancouver after all. So it has been a tumultuous time for him, but if he truly wants to stay in Vancouver, we've seen a number of players take discounts to remain with the Vancouver Canucks. Elias Pettersson, he signed a market value, whether you want to believe it or not. That was market value for a guy who had done what he had done at his age throughout his NHL career. JT Miller signs at a discount. Of course, Kiefer Sherwood signed at a discount. Tyler Myers, again, I don't think he's worth $3 million, but he signed at a discount compared to what he would have gotten on the market. Dakota Joshua, the same thing. Kevin Lankin didn't even come into this team. A bit of a different situation. But the point is, Patrick Allvin and Jim Rutherford have gotten a number of players on this team to sign contracts below their market value. Could they get Brock Boeser to do the same? Because if you're talking about a guy in Brock Boeser who can sign something like the Philip Hronek deal where he's making something in the low 7s, that makes sense for this hockey team. But if he's in that $8 to $8.5 million range, you might be better off trading him to get some assets in the door. So if the Canucks do trade Brock Boeser, what teams might be interested in his services? Let's touch on that on the other side. You're listening to Locked On Canucks, your Canucks every damn day. We'll be back on the other side after shouting out our friends over at Indeed. Man, oh man, I lost my co-host Kyle Bowen today. And who knows? Maybe I'll have to put out an ad on Indeed to find the next co-host of Locked On Canucks. More on that in 2 minutes. But if you need to hire or if you're looking for work, you got to use Indeed, okay? When it comes to hiring, Indeed, it's all you need, baby. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites because Indeed's sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster, all right? Man, oh man, when I put my resume up on Indeed, the last time I seriously need to look for a job, I was on Craigslist, okay? Debating selling my body. But thankfully, I put my resume on Indeed, and I found the job that I've had for the past 7 years, baby. So thank you, Indeed, for making sure I didn't sell my body to feed my family. And whether you're looking for work or hiring, you can speed up your hiring process now with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this very podcast. Locked On Canucks, baby. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Are you hiring? Guess what? Indeed, it's all you need, baby. All right. We're back here on Locked On Canucks. Your Canucks every damn day. And usually I'm joined by my co-host, Kyle Bowen again. He's doing 87% of the work on this program. This Locked On Canucks ain't nothing without Kyle Bowen. Today, he's a little under the weather. I'm not feeling great myself, man. I don't know if it's the bad Indian food I ate last night or my daughter puking on me on Sunday, but I'm on a steady diet of Pepto-Bismol today, baby. Much like Derek Forbort in the second game of the season, just chugging Pepto-Bismol out of the Timmy's cup. Cheers to that, baby. Let's go. Man, I'm thinking about this Canucks team right now. Maybe that might be the reason I'm not feeling well, to be honest with you. Because, again, I said it time and time again, and I believe it was SK93 in the comments on the post-game show on the other night when the Canucks got walloped by the Jets saying, Begsy, you promised us this, that the Canucks would be a Stanley Cup contender. I don't know if I promised it, but I did strongly believe that the Canucks would be a Stanley Cup contender. But NHL's weird sometimes, man. Look at the Winnipeg Jets, for instance. I think most thought they were a wildcard team at best. And here they are, one of the league leaders in the NHL so far this season. So sports is fickle in nature. Things can change quickly. And, again, we're only just past the midway mark. I do believe that things can change for your Vancouver Canucks because we've seen Elias Pettersson and JT Miller do this before in terms of just be two of the best players in the league. So I'm not fully giving up hope yet that they absolutely need to be traded. But man, oh man, it's going to tell us a lot over the next month or so coming up to the Four Nations break in the trade deadline, what this team is going to do. And they got a massive decision to make with Brock Boeser, right? We've seen them go both ways with free agents. Obviously, JT Miller, they re-signed in the offseason. Bo Horvat, as a UFA, they trade for Philip Hronek. And Elias Pettersson, they threatened to trade before signing him. So we've kind of seen it all from this management team. So that's why I don't think it's off the table that the Canucks trade Brock Boeser. I mean, you look at comments from Jim Rutherford and Patrick Elvine in the summer, or even Rutherford around Christmas time. He said that all options are on the table with Brock Boeser. Okay, he's performed well so far this season. Sexy guy. You want sexy players on your hockey team, but the Canucks are very unsexy right now in terms of that on-ice product and what they're doing on the ice. So if the Canucks are going to trade Brock Boeser, what teams make the most sense in terms of suitors for his services? And this sounds very cliche, but honestly, a team that stands out, because you're looking at teams in the playoff picture who are going to want to acquire a top six winger to bolster their scoring. One team that makes a lot of sense, if they can afford it, is the Minnesota Wild. The Minnesota Wild right now are having a pretty surprising season overall. They are currently 5th overall in the NHL in points, but they've started to slip a little bit of late. And their goal scoring per game in terms of the contenders in the league, that's not stellar. It's 17th overall in the NHL, averaging 2.96 goals per game. Man, oh man, the Canucks have dropped to 22nd overall, scoring 2.88 goals per game. Man, oh man, how far they've fallen. But the Minnesota Wild, one of the big issues with them is just the fact that they got that was $14 million of buyouts on the books. I mean, we talk about OE hell. Minnesota is on something else. But, trading for a guy like Brock Boeser, the reason a trade like that might make sense is the fact that, the Minnesota Wild, the buyout retention goes from $14 million to just 1.6 next season. So they could bring Boeser in as, a pending UFA and have tons of money to re-sign him. And I'm sure that would be a great story for Minnesota and that hockey team. It'd be more so a matter of affording him this season. So when I look at comparable trades to what the Canucks could get for Brock Boeser, I look at Tyler Toffoli from last season. And Brock Boeser, to me, obviously a younger, more valuable version of Tyler Toffoli, especially after scoring 40 goals last season. But at last year's trade deadline, Tyler Toffoli with 50% salary retained, around $2 million, netted the New Jersey Devils a second and a third round pick. I do think with Brock Boeser, because of the age, because he just scored 40, you should at least get a first and probably a first plus for Brock Boeser. Again, it's not that often that we see players in their prime, pending UFAs. I mean, Boeser is just barely old enough to be a UFA. See them traded away. So the Minnesota Wild, again, the cap issue at the yin yang, but with the Canucks, they could theoretically retain on Boeser, get that cap hit nice and low so the Minnesota Wild can afford it. And then it could be as simple as, a first and a second round pick. Now, the Minnesota Wild don't have their first round pick this year. That was traded away in the deal for David Jiricek recently. But maybe it's a second round pick and one of their top prospects. They got Riley Heidt, and they also got Jonathan Lekermaki's old teammate, Liam Ogren, who's actually having a pretty darn good year in the AHL as well. And he's actually been recalled to the team on a couple of occasions this season, and he's played in 8 NHL games for the Wild so far in 2024-25. So that could be a player of interest for the Vancouver Canucks as well. So again, a little cliche, but I do think Minnesota does kind of stand out as a team. That could be one of the top suitors for Boeser's services. Obviously a great story, but they need the goal scoring help as well. Another team that could be a suitor, and man, oh man, this is dark. I'm in the music mags. This is almost too dark to say out loud. The Los Angeles Kings. Of course, they got Tanner Jeannot, who injured Brock Boeser with a concussion. And by the way, F Tanner Jeannot. More on that in a couple of minutes. But Los Angeles Kings right now they're a team that could use more firepower heading into the playoffs, especially since they are slated to play the Edmonton Oilers in round 1 for about the 12th year in a row. No, actually the 4th year in a row. Brock Boeser had some success against Edmonton in the playoffs last season. Again, tragic that he missed Game 7 for the Vancouver Canucks. And LA, again, they could use that scoring boost up front. Now, in terms of assets that LA could give up, let's take a look here quickly. They got a decent amount of cap space because of an LTIR pool. Obviously, Doughty on LTIR right now. But looking at their team, man, oh man, what could the Kings give up here? They're kind of in that, they got Jack Studnicka on the team. Tyler Madden, so a couple old Canucks there. Unbelievable stuff. But the Kings do have their first round pick in this draft, in the next couple of drafts as well. So maybe with the Kings, it is something as simple as a first and a second round pick. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if Boeser becomes available, if that's a team that becomes interested in his services. Let me throw out a couple more options there in terms of teams that could chase someone like Brock Boeser. I think there's some fringe teams that could be interested. I think to me, the Kings and the Wild stand out as the most likely suitors. But a couple of fringe teams that could use some scoring if they try to make a playoff push would be the Bruins, the Utah Hockey Club, the Calgary Flames, the St. Louis Blues, and the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, you look at some of the other teams that are competing for a Stanley Cup, maybe looking for that piece to push them over the top. Maybe the Carolina Hurricanes are a team that stands out to me there. But, in terms of the top dogs in the league, they are the league leaders in goals scored. So I would look for the Minnesota Wild and LA Kings to be two of likely the top suitors to chase Brock Boeser if he does become available via trade. All right, let's wrap up the show on the other side. I want to get to the game tonight quickly against the LA Kings, the Tanner Jeannot revenge game. Get to Cam Neely, former Canuck of the week, and get to a couple of your comments as well here on Locked On Canucks. Because like I say, we're nothing here without you listening to Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs. We'll be back on the other side after showing it our friends over at Gametime. Like I said, if you want to buy Canucks tickets right now, I would say that you should hit up one of our top commenters, Callum Sandu, a.k.a. Callum McKenzie. And you might not want to buy tickets. But if you're not swayed by Callum and the $3,000 that he spent on Canuck games so far this season, I'm joking about Callum, then go make sure you go get some Canucks tickets with Gametime, okay? And whether it's Canucks, whether it's NFL, and whether it's music, some theater or some comedy, or sometimes, some of the best memories you can make are at sporting events, okay? I'll tell you one of my favorite sporting memories, Canucks games, okay? Getting up on the Jumbotron. I got up on the Jumbotron once, busting a move, Canucks and Stars. I was right at the stairs, hopped out there, started going nuts. But I wasn't as nuts as Kyle Bowden. There's one game, I didn't know Kyle was there, and Kyle ended up on the Jumbotron busting a move, and he actually got the crowd going wild. So Kyle, better dancer than me. but good memories. And those memories only happen at sporting events. Okay, let's go. So make sure you go get those tickets with Gametime. Now, Gametime, they made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature called Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Go download that Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It's game time. All right. We're back here on Locked On Canucks. My name is Trevor Beggs. Once in a while, not joined by my co-host Kyle Bowen, who again is a little under the weather today. I think suffering from his Packers cold still, as well as SK93 in the comments saying Bowen is day today. Now, someone who was more than day today was Brock Boeser when he got blindsided by Tanner Jeannot there. And again, as in terms of Canucks lines today, let's talk about the lines heading into tonight. This is from practice this morning. On the top line, you got DeBrusk, Pettersson, Lecker, Mackey. You got PDG, Miller, and Boeser. You have Heinen, Suter, and Garland. And you have Höglander, Bluger, and Sherwood. Sasson as the extra forward. Dakota Joshua still not practicing. On defense, there's Hughes, Hronek, Forbort, Myers, Soucy, and Desharnais. Noah Juleson absent from practice. So Desharnais spot in the lineup, an interesting one tonight because he was the guy who said that there would be revenge for what Tanner Jeannot did to Brock Boeser the last time these two teams played. And Vincent Desharnais has taken some criticism in this market, not just for his play, but for his lack of physicality as well. For a guy as big as he is, who should be, he at least he talks a big game. He hasn't really been all that physical. And I think a big part of it is, and it's a similar problem with Noah Juleson, is that sometimes when these guys are physical, they absolutely put themselves out of the play. And that can be a bit of a problem. But, look for a guy like Vincent Desharnais tonight to see if he stays true to his word. I mean, you talk that smack, you probably should back it up on the ice. And Brock Boeser deserves to be stood up for. I mean, come on, man. I'm 5'9". I'd stand up for Brock Boeser, man. Come on. I'd take a beating from my buddies, man. And it wouldn't be the first time that's happened. All right, so one guy who was a former Canucks teammate, we run the segment once in a while. We're going to run it right now, called the Cam Neely Former Canuck of the Week.
I don't want to say goodbye.
All right, this is our segment called the Cam Neely Former Canuck of the Week. And today, the player getting the shout-out is Vasily Podkolzin. Vasily Podkolzin. He obviously got traded to the Edmonton Oilers. That one hurt a little bit for a fourth-round pick last year. And Vasily Podkolzin right now, I mean, he's starting to find a bit of a groove with the Edmonton Oilers. He scored his 6th goal of the season last night. It was the game winner as the Edmonton Oilers beat the Minnesota Wild. Podkolzin now up to 6 goals and 17 points in 44 games for the Edmonton Oilers. So he's kind of hovering right around that 10-ish goals, 30-ish points for the Edmonton Oilers. His average ice time is starting to tick up. He has played, he's averaged over 50 minutes a game over his last 5 games, despite playing only 12-ish in Pittsburgh there. And he's got, 2 goals, 1 assist in his last 5 games as well. So, and he found a bit of a role. Again, we always knew Vasily Podkolzin, his defensive floor was relatively high. I think that's been true to Edmonton so far this season as well. They just play with confidence again. And that was always the danger with trading a guy like Vasily Podkolzin. So let me ask listeners right now. Did the Vancouver Canucks make a mistake in trading away Vasily Podkolzin? I'm going to say no. I don't know if Podkolzin, first and foremost, I don't think Podkolzin is much more than the player he is right now. I don't see some 20-goal, 50-point guy on the horizon, but he might be maybe at his peak, like a 12 to 15 goal and a 40-point player. Like he could have a season like that as well. The guy works his butt off. I think he is an NHL player, but he is a complimentary piece. Now, obviously, if he got saddled with McDavid and Draisaitl for a long period of time, maybe that would change a little bit. But at the end of the day, I look at the Canucks roster right now, and Nils Höglander's dip is something that no one saw coming, but he was certainly more of a player than Vasily Podkolzin. You look at Kiefer Sherwood and what he's brought; he's certainly more of a player than Podkolzin. The one that you kind of wonder about is Danton Heinen, but Danton Heinen has been around a 40-point guy, 35, 40-point guy for most of his career, having a bit of a down year in Vancouver this year. But even then, in the down year, he's got pretty similar numbers to Vasily Podkolzin. So I don't think the Canucks really made a mistake with this one, but it'll hurt a bit if Podkolzin goes on a bit of a run with the Edmonton Oilers and makes some noise. It'll also hurt a bit if the Canucks trade away Brock Boeser, which is one of the big talking points on today's episode today. So let's get to a couple of comments before we get out of here on Locked On Canucks. SK93 in the comments saying, for Brock Boeser, $7 million over 7 years, the 7 times 7, or $7.5 million over 5 years. Anything more than that is an overpayment. And that's a trap you don't want to fall into if you're the Vancouver Canucks, right? And that's why I think it's a topic of conversation today. No one's doubting that Brock Boeser is a good hockey player. But is he going to be worth $8 million for the next 5, 6, 7, 8 seasons for the Vancouver Canucks? Again, the cap goes up. Maybe that cap is a little easier to stomach. But the Canucks got to take a hard look at the mirror right now. And I do think that Alvin and Rutherford have one of the toughest jobs in hockey. Deciding what to do with Miller and Pettersson. Deciding if they can move forward with this core. Deciding if Brock Boeser is a part of that core. So there's a lot of tough decisions for this management team. But, we've seen lots of teams fall into this trap. And it's, easier to give a team kudos if they fall into this trap after they've already won, but this Canucks core has not made it past the first round of the playoffs. You don't want to be locking into a core long-term with a bunch of guys into their 30s when the core hasn't done anything for this team. So again, this stretch coming up here, the stretch the Canucks are currently on where they have sucked, this is a pretty telling and important stretch for this hockey team. And if they continue to flounder up into the Four Nations and even afterwards up until the trade deadline, then I think Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin are going to be forced to either trade Boeser or trade one of the stars on this team. Like, we are hitting that point with the Canucks right now. Let's shout out Green in the comments. Build around Hughes and Petey. Low to mid-20s is what we want for our window. And again, sometimes you only have to trade one guy. And then you can kind of solve what's going on with this team. And Green's on board with saying, trade Miller, addition by subtraction. Whoa. I'm not going to quite say that. I mean, Miller's still a good hockey player. Even in the down year, he's almost he's tied with Elias Pettersson for third on the Canucks in points, right? So both those guys, despite having down seasons, are still some of the leaders on this hockey team in terms of the points that they put up. They are still good hockey players. We have just seen them nowhere near her best this season. But sometimes trading one guy is all it takes. And I do wonder if it's Miller or Pettersson or Boeser, if trading one of those guys makes a difference. I assume that trading Boeser probably isn't the answer to fix the locker room issues. I do strongly believe he is a glue guy in that room. But sometimes there's only trading one guy that'll make the difference for the hockey team. All right, let's get out of here on Locked On. Okay, let's give one more comment to Infamous Höglander this season's Mikheyev. Oh my God. What happened to Nils Höglander, man? That is among many mysteries of the Vancouver Canucks this season. Well, I might have to unpack that. Unsolved Mysteries Vancouver Canucks edition. Stay tuned for that here on Locked On Canucks. But for now, I got to get out of here. So shout out to everyone from the first-time listeners to the everydayers and everyone in between. We love each and every one of you, your families, and your dogs too. If you like what we're doing here on Locked On Canucks, make sure you go subscribe and like this video on YouTube. And on the podcast side, go follow us and leave a 5-star review. But for now, we're getting out of here. Go Canucks, go. Turn the season around. Goddamn. Take out Tanner Jeannot. Whoop the King's ass tonight. And let's turn the ship around. Because, my God, the Canucks had a good run in Locked On Canucks history until the last little bit where it's been a little flaky, just like my face, baby. And we got to go. I'm Trevor Banks. See you next time on Locked On Canucks.
You're Locked On Canucks, your daily podcast on the Vancouver Canucks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.